Welcome to the reading of Guide's Greatest Hero Stories. Chapter 1, Prayer in the Blizzard, by Clarice, Stoneman, Widman, January 5, 1955. I doubt that any of the children in our class regarded Anna as anything but a freak before the day of the blizzard. She seemed almost like a friendly puppy, following us around the schoolyard, anxious to please, but always doing the wrong thing. Everybody laughed at her awkward mistakes. Anna was from a German refugee family that had come to the United States to live. She was tall for her age and very slender, with thick braids the colour of clover honey, shy blue eyes, and a smile that quirked only one corner of her wide mouth. Anna could not speak English. That was the reason she seemed always to be doing the wrong thing. Our teacher, Miss Bailey, put her in our class because she was just our age, 12 years old. Miss Bailey asked us to include Anna in our games, but since she could not understand us any more than we could understand her, she was often left out. Miss Bailey frequently kept her after school to teach her picture words. That's what Anna was doing one November afternoon when Paul and Fred Jones, Alberta, Sloan, and I started home. It was one of those warm Indian summer afternoons, too warm for November, even in Kansas, where the autumn days linger sometimes well into December. "It's such a wonderful day," said Alberta. "Why don't we go out to the Gringham's Black Walnut Grove and gather some nuts?" Mr. Gringham said I could gather nuts in his grove any time I wanted to. It would be fun. "I could stop at Uncle Jack's feed store and get some snacks," Paul offered Paul. "Mother likes the flavour of black walnuts," I added my bit. "I can surprise her with some nuts for the fruitcake she's going to bake tomorrow." "We'd better not," Fred shook his head. "We're expected home right after school. Why can't we plan to go tomorrow?" "Because it might be stormy tomorrow," said Alberta. "The weather forecaster says a storm is coming over the weekend." "It looks very much like it," scoffed Paul, rolling his head in all directions to view the cloudless sky. "I wouldn't be at all surprised if we'd be snowballing each other at this time tomorrow." We all laughed. The idea seemed ridiculous. "Come on, I'm going," said Alberta, firmly walking away toward the country highway. We all hurried to catch up with her. Even Fred forgot his objections and crossed the road to help Paul get the sacks from his uncle's feed store. We followed the road to a small creek at the edge of town, then cut across an alfalfa field, skirted a large hay barn, and walked on through a woodlot. Beyond a large pasture of buffalo grass, we could see the trees. It was farther than I had imagined. I had never been on a hike that had taken me so far from home before, and I liked the excitement of the adventure. Just as we reached the grove, we looked back and saw a girl in the distance. She seemed to be following us. "It's that German girl, Anna," Paul said. She helps Mrs. Gringham with the housework on weekends. I suppose she'll be coming over here, tagging after us." But Anna didn't come by the grove. She just waved to us from the pasture and continued on her way. We didn't work very hard at gathering nuts. We found it great fun to pelt each other with the balls. The husks were soft and cushioned the sting of the direct hits. Suddenly, we noticed that the sun was not shining so brightly anymore. Gusty blasts of wind sent the dry leaves whirling high into the air. It was getting very cold. Grey clouds rolled across the sky. "If we're going to fill these bags before dark, we'll have to hurry," said Fred. We stopped our playing and began to gather nuts as fast as we could. Finally, Alberta said, "I'm going home. I'm cold." "Yes, let's all go home," I said. "We have plenty of nuts anyway, all we can carry." I didn't have to persuade anyone else. They were all ready to go, and soon we were hurrying across the pasture toward town. We hadn't gone far when Paul said, "Look, it's beginning to snow." Then suddenly there were many, many flakes whirling and swirling about us. It was getting colder by the minute, and our light summer clothing was little protection against the raw wind. And we had to face that wind. Fred led the way, and we followed single file behind him, getting some small protection from the worst of the blasts. The distance across the pasture seemed endless. We could see only a few feet ahead. The storm seemed to surround us on all sides like a white wall. "I'm cold," said Alberta, beginning to cry. I felt like crying too. "We should have reached the woodlot long before this," said Paul. "It will be better when we get into the shelter of the trees." "There's a dark object ahead of us," said Fred, whipping the crust of snow from his face. "Perhaps it's one of Mr. Gringham's cows." Then suddenly Fred shouted, "It's Anna!" Sure enough, it was Anna, with her arms full of warm clothing she had borrowed from Mrs. Gringham. She knew we had no coats with us and were not prepared for the sudden storm. We joked and laughed as Anna helped us put on the warm coats. Even Alberta wiped away her tears and seemed cheerful again. Then we started on. Anna took Fred's arm and motioned that we should follow her. "But she's going in the wrong direction," objected Paul. "We don't want to go to the Gringhams. We want to go home." The boys carried on an argument with Anna in sign language for what seemed like hours, but was really only minutes. Finally, Anna gave up and nodded her head to show them that we must follow her. It was beginning to get dark, and the snow was still falling thickly about us. On and on we went. The storm seemed to be fiercer than ever. We gave up trying to talk to each other because it took all our breath to struggle forward against the wind and snow. Even the warm coats were not enough protection against the icy blasts. Alberta began to cry again. "I'm cold," she whimpered. "My feet feel like clubs. I know they must be frozen. We're going to freeze to death out here in the storm." I'd been fearing the same thing secretly. Maybe we would never reach home again. By unspoken consent, we had all left our nuts by the wayside. Then suddenly, we bumped smack into the side of a building. It was the hay barn. We had wandered from our course enough to miss the woodlot completely, but luckily we had not missed the barn as well. We followed the boys around the building. Fred opened the door, and we hurried inside. It was dark and cold in the barn, but the protection was a welcome rest from our battle with the storm. We stood close together in the snowy darkness. From the dim light that entered the doorway, I could see that Anna was moving some armfuls of hay into a corner. Then she pushed us all toward the comfortable place she had prepared. We sat in a circle on the hay, resting. The hay smelled musty and damp, and before long we felt even colder than we had been out in the storm. Alberta was still crying. "Stop that sniffling," said Paul. "What are you crying about anyway? We aren't lost." "Just as soon as we have rested up, we'll go on home." "Sure," said Fred. "We'll be home soon. Then we'll catch it." We shouldn't have gone to gather nuts without permission. We were expected to go straight home from school with no dilly-dallying. "We're sorry," I said, "but that doesn't help us now. I'll never do this again," wailed Alberta. "Nor I," said Paul. "We've been very foolish." Then we all sat silently, waiting for someone to make the first move to start out into the storm again. No one did. The patch of grey light that was the doorway grew darker. The wind whistled about the eaves. I could feel the snow sifting in on my face, but I was too cold and miserable to care. It seemed like hours later that I suddenly awoke. What had awakened me? Then I heard it clearly. It was a voice. Anna's voice. She was talking in German, and I could not understand a word she was saying. Yet somehow, from the tone of her voice, I knew that she was praying. I was stiff with cold, but I stumbled to my feet and found my way through the darkness to her side. As she continued her prayer, I found myself repeating it after her. Unser Vater in dem Himmel, dein Reich komme. Anna's prayer gave us both the strength we needed. We roused the others, and all together we marched back and forth across the narrow, cleared space. Anna began to sing one of the hymns Miss Bailey had been teaching us for the Christmas program. It came upon the midnight clear. We all joined in, and it seemed almost as though we were back in the schoolroom again. We forgot, for the moment, that we were cold and hungry and far from home. Just as we finished singing the second stanza, we heard shouts outside the barn. We ran to the door. The lights from Mr. Gringham's big truck shone into our faces. An hour later, 5 cold, tired and hungry children were delivered by way of the Gringham truck to their worried parents. From that day on, Anna was one of us. We'd helped her to learn our language and took turns staying after school to drill her in picture words. Miss Bailey said Alberta one day as we were helping our teacher after school. When we were lost in the blizzard, Anna said a very beautiful prayer in German. Jesus heard Anna's prayer and sent help to us. Do you suppose we could get Anna to teach the prayer to us? That is how it happened, that our whole class learned to say the Lord's Prayer in German. Ever since then, those words have reminded us that Jesus is always near at hand to hear a prayer in any language.